Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. This month I'm going to show you how to paint metal in watercolor. So for my demonstration I've chosen a collection of different types of metal buttons. What you're going to find is that painting metal is quite similar to painting glass. It gets complicated if you try to see all of the shapes and colors at once, but I'm going to show you a way that you can practice deconstructing the different layers and the colors on metal. So what I've done is I've taken 3 pieces of acetate film and I've drawn the exact same circle on each of them. Now when you look at this silver button, you see highlights, shadows, and then the color that's left over. So to keep it simple, let's just focus on those 3. Now on the first acetate film, I'm going to see only the shape of the mid-tone. So I'm going to paint my base tone here. Okay. On the second panel, I'm going to paint only the shadows. So the shadow is going to be here, and then it comes down here a little bit and shades the bottom part of the button, and I see just kind of a light shaded area right through here. The highlight is going to be white, so I don't need to paint that, but I do need to paint a shadow, and I'm going to paint that on the third button. So there's this shadow that comes over like this, and then there's a much lighter version of that on this side. Okay, so step 2 is to wait for all 3 of these to dry completely, and then you sandwich them together, and if you wind up with the button that you were hoping for, then you know that you've deconstructed it correctly. So I'm going to put those aside, wait for them to dry completely, and then we can look and see how we did. In the meantime though, I'm going to set up a still life with 3 of these buttons. That looks pretty interesting right there. And I'm going to sketch that out. I'll just sketch it right below. I'll make it a little bit bigger, but you can see how I'm going to start with the largest shapes, and then I'll start to clean up my lines and make those more precise. Keep in mind that your vantage point is different than mine, so my drawing is not going to look correct to you. So then I can just really roughly put in these basic shapes. It's like this. And then I can go back and do my details. So I'm going to go off camera now and clean this drawing up, get it ready to paint, and then I'll come back to you. We'll look at our 3-level acetate film button, and we'll start painting the buttons that you see here. Okay, I've got things sketched out here, and also my 3 layers are dry, so I'm going to stack them up. Here's the base tone, here's the shadows, and here are the cast shadows. So you can see how you can use the acetate to break down the different layers and to help you to see how they should look individually. Now this is a really simple one, but the same process works for anything, really complicated forms or whatever else. You can even use white paint and paint the shape of the highlight if that will help you to see them. But the process of breaking down the different shapes of color and tone onto different layers will help you to focus on seeing those different layers and putting them in as shapes. So now let's push forward to this painting. I have everything sketched out and a few highlights saved with masking fluid. Now we're going to start with this gold button, but before we start I want you to remember that it's easy to layer dark on top of light with watercolor, but it is not easy to pick out light when you've already laid down things that are darker. So I'm going to start by painting the highlight color, not the brightest highlight, but the shiny gold color. So I'll paint that first, right over everything, because this is the lightest color that we see, and it's also going to dry lighter still. Okay, do the same thing on the silver button. You're working hard to match those colors, but again, I want to work first of all on matching the lightest color that's not bright highlight. So I'll work right like this. I'm going to avoid a little bit of this edge, and then in the middle the light is hitting it pretty hard and making a very bright highlight. And once that dries more, I can soften it farther. But I'm going to move forward to this button. This has gold and black, so I'm going to do the same thing and look for the lightest color that's not the bright highlight. And on this button, I have saved some of the bright highlights with masking fluid. Very good. Okay, so the base tone needs to dry completely, and then we can go back into it and layer in the second color on top. So I'll see you in just a little bit. Now that first color is dry, so I can go ahead and add the darker colors. Remember, this is supposed to be your highlight color that you start with. So the actual highlights have been kept white with masking film. Then you have the lightest color of the button, and now I can go in with the base color. It's a little tricky to see, but this is why you want to practice separating those different layers, so you can train your eye to see the difference between the various colors. So I'll start with my silver button here, and I'm going to paint the base tone in one big shape. That might be enough for that one. I'll come and do the same thing to this silver button. And then I get the brush wet and I blend it out a little bit so I get that reflective surface. And then I can do the same thing to the gold buttons. And actually, before I do that, I want to preserve those letters. While this color is dry, I'm going to go in with my masking tool and I'll pull out some of the areas that I want to have this light yellow. And then wherever I see some of those highlight edges, I'm going to go in and protect those as well. On this button, I'm going to do the same thing. Doing this is going to save me time in the long run, because instead of picking around all of these small shapes, I'll be able to simply paint over the top with black, and the button will be nearly done at the end of that pass. Before I can paint those, I need to let that masking fluid dry. So I'll do that. Just take a couple minutes and we'll come back. Now the masking fluid is dry, so I'm going to go ahead and add those darker colors on top. And I'll just go right over the top, because all of that design stuff is protected. That's good. Then for this bronze button here, I have kind of a dirty gold color that I need to mix up. Ooh, that's perfect. You see, and I'm looking for the shape of this color, and I'm layering it right on top of the button. You're looking for shapes of the shadow and shapes of the light. Okay, so I can let that dry. This is dry, so I'm going to go over the top here. So now I'm looking for the shadow color. And then I can just paint that shadow color right over the top of my masking fluid. And then here and there, I'll touch the edge. Give it a little color. That will help make it look like a reflective edge. And we can do more of that later too. And before I go any farther with the silver button, I'm going to soften up that highlight. So I'll get a flat angled brush. This is my craft brush. And now I'll just add a few lines that will help to indicate that there's a light scratch texture on this button. Okay, now we are to the point where I need to let that dry again. The next step is to remove this misket. And remember, misket is going to leave a harsh edge that you have to blend in or compensate for in some way. So it's a good idea to get it off your page as soon as you can. So now I'm going to get a small round brush and work on the details. To do that, I'm just going to pay really close attention to what I see. Just remember, you don't want to start on your detail work until all of the colors are in place. And oftentimes in metal buttons, you're going to see colors reflected from the surroundings. So I'm seeing some red reflected in the side, kind of a orangey yellow color. So I'll put that down where I see that happening. In this button, I just need to add some darks to the side of the letters that are in the shadows, and that will help to raise up those ridges. So I'm just going to take my time and add the little details like this. Let me go ahead and add these details off camera so you don't go to sleep on me, and when I come back we'll look at adding those shadows and we should be about done. Now my beads are pushed up in realism, so I'm going to go ahead and add some shadows. You just look for the shape. I'm going to match the color first, and then you can either freehand it or you can draw it first. I do the outline and then I fill it in, trying to go for one big piece. And you'll notice too that I only go about 3/4 of the way to the button and then fill in with water, so I'll get that natural gradation in the tone of the shadow. I'll do that same thing for the buttons over here. Fill in the outside. And here I want to preserve a line of that reflected light, so I'm going to carefully avoid the bottom edge of the button. Do the same thing with this button. Go nearly to the edge, then dampen your brush and let that color wash out. So I'll go ahead and finish up those shadows off camera and come back to you at the finished piece. After adding the cast shadows to the buttons, your finished piece might look something like this. So if you look at each individual button, you can see those 3 layers of color coming through: the shadows, the base, and the highlight. So painting metal really comes down to breaking down the different layers of color and to seeing those shapes as shapes, then layering them on as such. Remember your exercise that will help you in seeing those shapes, getting that acetate film and layering them together. If you do that exercise a few times and then apply it to a simple still life like this, you're going to see that both your skill level in painting and your ability to capture realism are going to increase substantially. But that concludes this month's painting tutorial, and I thank you so much for watching.